Hello and welcome to Slow Sleep Stories. Thanks. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there now. Turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's start this journey together tonight. The story is beginning to unfold now. Let's begin. In the fertile hills of southern Greece, tucked gently between groves of cypress and crumbling limestone paths, stood the ancient temple complex of Asclepios at Epidurus. Pilgrims traveled from every corner of the Hellenic world, not to make sacrifices or chant battle hymns, but to sleep. Among these travelers was a boy named Nicandros. He was perhaps 10 or 11 at that peculiar age, where one might still talk to bees or climb fig trees barefoot with equal seriousness. His mother, Philea, had wrapped him in a woolen cloak, its edge frayed from years of use, and together they had made the long journey from their modest village, nestled along the Gulf of Argolis. Nicandros had fallen from a mule a few months earlier, and, ever since, had walked with a slight limp and a faraway look in his eyes. Local healers had done what they could: poultices, herbs, incantations, whispered into olive oil, but none had helped. Philea had heard stories of Epidurus and its sacred dream temple, where the god of healing whispered in sleep and snakes carried blessings instead of bites. The temple was no palace. Its stones were bleached by sun and softened by time. Poppies crept through the cracks, and ivy curled along its fluted columns like lazy green ribbons. The priests, draped in off-white tunics, spoke softly and walked barefoot, their footsteps hardly louder than moths in the dusk as the sun dipped behind the hills. Philea sat with Nicandros near a fountain that trickled endlessly into a carved stone basin. A priest approached, gray-bearded and bent only slightly with age, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. He looked into Nicandros's eyes for a long moment, not in judgment, but with a sort of practiced gentleness, the kind one sees in old bakers and good librarians. "You'll sleep here tonight," the priest murmured. "The god may come to you, or perhaps his children will." Nicandros blinked. Children. The priest only smiled and glanced toward the temple steps. They were led through the cool corridors, which smelled faintly of chamomile and old scrolls, and into the abaton, the sleeping hall. The walls were high and windowless, and the only light came from oil lamps flickering in golden bowls. Dozens of mats were laid in orderly rows, each with a pillow stuffed with soft reeds and a folded linen coverlet. Nicandros chose the third mat from the left, near the statue of Asclepios. The god sat in marble silence, his carved eyes cast downward in serene thought. In his hand, a staff entwined with a single serpento, symbol of medicine, of rebirth, of dreams that cured rather than confused. As he lay down, Nicandros felt unsure. The mat was cool beneath him, the temple stone whispering its chill into his spine. But it wasn't unpleasant. In fact, it was like the earth was holding him gently, reminding him he belonged here for the night. Philea kissed his forehead and whispered a prayer, her words as soft as the moths flitting through the lamplit air, and then she left. The doors of the abaton creaked closed behind her. There were a few murmured voices from other pilgrims, mostly old men with aching joints, or women cradling herbal bundles to their chests. A baby cooed once, then fell silent. One man was already snoring in a most theatrical fashion, loud enough that one might imagine he'd inhaled a flute. Nicandros lay still, hands folded on his chest. Somewhere high above, in the temple's hidden rafters, owls stirred. The scent of crushed myrrh drifted past his nose. And then, from the far corner of the hall, there was a sound not of footsteps, but of scales against stone. It was soft, softer than sandals. A shape moved beneath the statue of the god. Nicandros didn't gasp, he didn't scream. Instead, he felt something like ... curiosity, maybe even comfort. A dark, sinuous body slid across the floor, not toward him, but past him, trailing a cool breeze behind it. The temple snakes had come. They weren't large, certainly not as long as Nicandros had imagined. Their scales shimmered gold in the firelight, and their eyes were the color of polished amber. They didn't hiss or strike or coil menacingly. Instead, they moved like lazy river water, curling near the sleeper's feet or nestling along the base of the statue. One of them paused. Near Nicandros's mat, it lifted its head slightly. Its tongue flicked the air. He blinked at it, and then it yawned. If snakes could yawn, Nicandros suppressed a giggle. The snake slid on, vanishing behind the hem of the next pilgrim's blanket. Sleep came slowly but steadily, like fog rolling in from a gentle sea. Nicandros's breath matched the rhythm of the lamps flickering. Somewhere in the temple's deeper halls, a flute began to play low and wavering and lovely, as if the wind itself had learned a tune. He dreamed of olive groves, of a deer leaping over a brook, of voices singing in languages he did not know, yet somehow understood. And when he opened his eyes again, just for a moment before dawn, a small, coiled form lay beside his pillow. Its eyes were closed, and it was smiling. When the temple doors groaned open to the light of early morning, the snakes were already gone. Nicandros sat up slowly on his mat, blinking away a dream that was already slipping through his fingers like sand. Around him, other pilgrims were stirring stretching arms, murmuring to each other, folding linens with the careful reverence of people waking from something sacred. He glanced toward the marble statue of Ask. The stone eyes were unchanged, unmoving, but something in the air felt different, like the world had whispered something important in its sleep and now waited patiently to see if anyone remembered. He padded quietly to the edge of the sleeping chamber where a small basin of warm water had been left for washing. A priest nearby handed him a cloth without speaking, just a slow, knowing smile and a nod. Nicandros rinsed his face, water dripping down his nose and chin, and felt somehow lighter, like a bird had nested in his chest overnight, and now it fluttered softly beneath his ribs. "Did you see them?" whispered a girl beside him, perhaps a few years older, hair tied in neat plaits. He nodded. "They were quiet. They always are," she replied, "but they listen." That day passed in silence and sunlight. Thaleia sat with Nicandros beneath a fig tree in the outer courtyard, while priests led soft-voiced prayers and old women knotted offerings into branches. Pilgrims weren't required to speak of their dreams, though many did. Some dreams were filled with riddles, labyrinths of color and movement. Others showed strange creatures, glowing springs, even talking fish. All were believed to be messages from Asclepios or from the sacred serpents who served as his messengers. Nicandros listened, but he didn't share his dream. Something about the deer, the brook, the songs he wanted to keep that safe for now, like a secret folded carefully in a pocket. It was during the afternoon nap, a temple tradition encouraged by the priests, that Nicandros first noticed something odd. He wasn't trying to nap, not really. He was nibbling a bit of barley bread and staring at a lizard making heroic attempts to climb a very smooth rock. But something shifted in the air, a sort of hush, like the wind held its breath. He turned his head slightly and saw one of the older priests tall, with hair like wet straw dozing against a sun-warmed column. mouth slightly agape. His name was Theodax, and he had a reputation. He falls asleep anywhere, a passing pilgrim once whispered, not unkindly, temple, courtyard, even during sermons. But no one seemed to mind. In fact, a strange rumor had begun to float around the complex like incense. They said Theodax dreamed for other people. One morning, a man had arrived, limping, and left, after a single night, walking without pain. He claimed it was Theodax's dream that had done it. Another woman said she'd been trying to conceive for years, only to dream she had twins, then found herself expecting just a month later. Each time, Theodax had fallen asleep somewhere nearby. It's like he catches them, someone said. Like butterflies. Nicandros found this both delightful and puzzling. Could dreams be caught? Could they be shared, like honey or songs? He crept a little closer to where Theodax dozed and sat cross-legged on the warm stones, pretending to play with pebbles. Theodax snored, once a sort of theatrical hump fan, then muttered something that sounded like, "No, not the lemon goose." Again, Nicandros nearly burst out laughing. He clapped a hand over his mouth and turned it into a cough. Later, that evening, as dusk returned and the temple's long shadows folded themselves into cozy corners, Nicandros asked his mother a question. "Do snakes sleep?" Thalea blinked. What an odd question. Do they? I mean, if they're messengers, do they have dreams, too? His mother considered this. Perhaps, maybe they remember dreams from the people they curl next to. Nicandros imagined that all those little golden bodies curled up like commas in the sentences of people's lives, gathering words and images like souvenirs. Back in the Abaton, the night was warmer. Someone had spilled a bit of lavender oil near one of the lamps, and the room smelled sweet and herbaceous. Nicandros lay back on his mat and felt a deep yawn rise from the soles of his feet, all the way up to the crown of his head. He didn't try to force sleep. He let it arrive like the snakes, softly, without announcement. This time, the dreams were different. He was standing in a marble hallway that stretched forever in both directions, with tiny doorways spaced every few feet. Behind each door, a person sleeping, and beside each person, a snake curled like a question mark. He wandered from door to door, peeking in. Some sleepers whispered, some smiled. One man snored so loudly that his snake rolled its eyes and slithered. Under the mat, Nicandros laughed in the dream, but then he stopped, because the hallway ended in a mirror. He looked into it and saw himself not as he was, but older, taller, standing in white robes. A serpent curled around his wrist like a bracelet. His limp was gone. He was speaking to a crowd. They were listening, and then, just like that, he was awake again. A snake lay curled at the foot of his mat. It gave him a look that could only be described as amused. Nicandros didn't mention the mirror dream to anyone, not because he was afraid, and not because he thought no one would believe him. He simply didn't want to let the image slip too soon. There was something precious about the way his dream self had stood, there tall, strong, and completely unafraid, with a serpent nestled around his arm like an old friend. Besides, it wasn't every day you dreamed of being a healer the next morning. As the temple roosters offered their half-hearted crowing, they were famously lazy. Birds fed too well on figs and leftover bread from the pilgrim kitchens. Nicandros awoke without the dull ache that usually clung to his legs like heavy vines. He blinked, he stretched, and to his quiet surprise, nothing hurt. No limp, no pull. In the thigh, just stillness, lightness. He didn't say anything at first, didn't leap up, shouting. Instead, he sat still for a while, gazing at the flickering oil lamps as they made puddles of gold on the stone floor. The temple was still hushed, though a few of the older women were already gathering their satchels, tying their cloaks, adjusting their sandals for the long walk home. He slipped outside. The sun had just crept over the tops of the surrounding hills, bathing the columns in warm pink light. Birds flitted between the olive branches, gossiping softly. A dog lay stretched near the temple steps, belly up, looking smug in his early morning sunbath. Nicandros walked down the temple path, past the pool where pilgrims washed their feet, around the fig grove, and along the narrow road that led out toward the healing theater, another part of the sanctuary where music and plays were used to soothe the heart. His stride was steady, balanced. It was like remembering how to dance. Philea found him sitting on a mossy wall near the grove, swinging his legs idly and feeding crumbs to a very entitled turtle. She stood quietly for a moment, watching. "I see you're out on morning adventures," he grinned. "I think I dreamed my limp away." She walked over, sat beside him, and patted his back gently. "Maybe you did. Maybe the god came to you. Or maybe the snakes carried something out while you slept." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then, do turtles dream?" "Oh, absolutely," she said. "Mostly of strawberries, a pause, or hats." They both laughed, quiet and warm. That afternoon, a festival began. Unannounced, as many of the temple's celebrations were, few of the priests began playing flutes and lyres under the cypress trees, and pilgrims shared roasted almonds and citrus cakes wrapped in fig leaves. Children danced, mimicking the snakes in long, slithering lines. A pair of goats wandered through the crowd, one with a wreath of rosemary on its head, the other clearly jealous. Nicandros found himself drawn to the theater, not the great amphitheater, with its perfect acoustics and sweeping tiers, but a smaller one near the edge of the grove. It was called the Whispering Bowl, where sick pilgrims were invited to listen to soft stories, comedies, usually. Nothing heavy, just the kind of tales that made your chest feel looser and your shoulders less tight that day. An old actor with wild hair and shoes that squeaked every time he gestured performed a monologue about a chicken who became a tax collector. His impressions of bureaucratic hens and slightly corrupt roosters were surprisingly accurate by the end. Even the statues nearby seemed amused. Nicandros laughed so hard he got hiccups. One of the temple boys around his age, with a gap-toothed grin and a tunic 2 sizes too big, furred in his small cup of honey water. "You're new," he said, handing over the cup. "Just visiting," Nicandros replied. "Sleep with the snakes yet?" He nodded. "Yeah," the boy said, settling next to him. "Me too. One of them curled around my head like a crown. The priest said that meant I was royal in a past life." Nicandros blinked. "Do you believe that?" "Nah, I just think I snore weird." They both laughed again. The honey water tasted like sunlight. As dusk fell, the last of the almond shells were swept up. The goats were led reluctantly away, and lanterns were lit in a slow, peaceful procession around the temple complex. Pilgrims returned to the abaton or wandered the gardens. The Leia sat near the main steps, weaving tiny garlands of thyme and violets for anyone who passed. Nicandros felt tired, not the heavy kind of tired that followed a fever or long illness, but the satisfied kind, the kind that came after laughing all day, eating something delicious, and realizing you hadn't limped once. That night in the abaton, he lay on his mat and smiled up at the statue of Asclepios. "You can rest too," he whispered. As if on cue, a snake slid softly across the floor, nudging against his heel like a sleepy cat. He dreamt of a classroom under a lemon tree. He was older again, teaching children how to listen to the wind, how to tell which herbs made good tea. And which ones made you burp uncontrollably? One of the students kept asking about turtles. Nicandros smiled in his sleep. Nicandros awoke to the sound of bees, not the alarming kind of bee snow, frantic buzzing or mid-flight tantrums, but the lazy, slow drone of morning pollinators, floating from lavender bloom to lavender bloom. It was the sort of sound that made you want to roll over and nap again, but he resisted. Barely, he sat up, blinking in the soft golden light pouring through the narrow temple windows. A gentle breeze drifted in, stirring the corners of the sleeping mats and setting a few loose olive leaves twirling lazily along the floor like sleepy ballerinas. The Abaton was still quiet. Most of the other pilgrims were still nestled under their linen covers, dreaming away. Nicandros stretched, yawned so wide it made his eyes water, and padded quietly outside. There was something about early morning at the temple. It wasn't just the light or the air or even the quiet rustle of robes as the priests prepared for the day. Was the feeling like the whole place had just finished a long exhale, a sigh that stretched across centuries. He wandered through the herb gardens, brushing fingers against rosemary, thyme, and the occasional ambitious dandelion. The snakes didn't often venture out in daylight, but every now and then he caught a glimpse of flicker of gold or green sliding between the stones. "Morning walk?" asked a voice behind him. It was Theodax, looking especially rumpled, with his sash tied in a way that suggested he'd dressed while half asleep, or perhaps while dreaming. "Couldn't sleep any longer," Nicandros replied. "That's a good sin," said the priest. "Usually means the dreams have done their work." They strolled for a while, side by side, in that companionable silence that only happens between people who have shared something ineffable and are wise enough not to prod at it too much. "Have you ever dreamed for someone else?" Nicandros asked suddenly. Theodax chuckled. "I've dreamed because of someone else. Sometimes I wake up with someone else's story in my head. Could be a healer from Corinth or a baker from Delos. Once, I dreamed I was a goat." Nick blinked. "A goat. A very self-important goat. I was giving a lecture on how olives are harvested." They both laughed, and Theodax patted his shoulder. "Dreams aren't always meant to be understood. Sometimes they're just how the soul stretches its legs." Later that day, Nicandros and Philea visited the sanctuary's library. It wasn't the largest library, certainly not like those in Alexandria or Athens, but it had a gentle smell of papyrus, beeswax, and old learning. Scrolls lined the walls in neatly bundled rows, organized by subject dreams. Herbs, celestial signs, healing rituals, and recipes involving worryingly large amounts of garlic. Philea greeted the librarian, a woman with ink-stained fingers and an impressively high bun, who nodded toward a collection of dream journals. "Pilgrims sometimes write them down," she said, pushing her spectacles up her nose, "or draw them. You'd be surprised how many people dream of fish running political campaigns." Nicandros flipped through a few scrolls. Some were elaborate, with tiny painted details temples rising out of lakes, talking dear sons with human faces. Others were simple notes, like, "Saw a crow dancing, not sure why, felt peaceful." He found one that made him pause. It was from years ago, written in a shaky but determined hand. "I saw myself healed, not just of my illness, but of my sadness. The snake didn't speak, but I understood anyway. Sometimes healing means remembering who you were before the wound." He read it twice, then carefully rolled it back up and tucked it into its slot. That afternoon, he helped in the temple kitchens. A traveling healer had arrived from Thessaly, bringing with her a new recipe for herb cakes. Nicandros mashed figs and stirred barley flour, sneaking spoonfuls of honey when the cooks weren't looking. The healer, tall and cheerful, with a voice like warm soup, laughed when he smeared dough on his cheek by accident. Mark of a true baker, she said. He liked her instantly. She told stories while they worked, mostly funny ones. One about a goat who refused to eat unless the flute player serenaded it. Another about a priest who mistook poppy syrup for wine and fell asleep during a wedding. But you, she said, nodding at Nicandros, you've got the healer's hands. You press herbs like someone who listens. That night, back in the Abaton, Nicandros lay on his mat thinking about that. Healer's hands. He liked the sound of it. It felt right. The snakes came again, just one this time, small and golden, and it curled gently near his ankle. He didn't feel startled anymore, just quietly honored. In his dream, he was walking through a vast garden filled with people, some laughing, some crying, some simply sitting with their eyes closed. As he passed, the plants near them shifted, growing taller, brighter, blooming with unseen energy. He touched a woman's shoulder, and suddenly the tree next to her burst into apricots. He woke smiling. When Nicandros opened his eyes the next morning, the Abaton was nearly empty. Not abandoned, just quietly returned to stillness. As pilgrims rose, collected their things, and made their way back to their homes. Some limped less, some walked taller. All of them, in some way, were lighter. The golden snake had vanished from his ankle, though it had left behind a single scale, no larger than a fingernail, shimmering faintly, like the last glimmer of a dream. Just before waking, he tucked it into the hem of his sash, not for luck, but for remembering. Breakfast in the communal courtyard was olives, cheese, honey cakes, and conversation. Nicandros sat with Philea and the cook from Thessaly, who was still gently scolding him for trying to eat fig paste with a mixing spoon the night before. Next time, she said, shaking her head, at least pretend to be subtle. They laughed and passed around warm rolls wrapped in fig leaves. Theodax joined them, holding 2 mugs of herbal tea and a scroll tucked under one arm. I've got something, he said, handing one mug to Nika Ndros. It was the dream scroll from the library, the one with the message about healing beyond illness. You wrote this? Nicandros asked. Theodax nodded. Years ago, after I first arrived here, I'd just left the army. My leg was broken, but that wasn't really the wound that brought me here. Nicandros studied the handwriting again. I didn't think priests admitted they needed healing. Oh, we're the worst patients, Theodax replied with a grin, always trying to explain away our pain with metaphors and riddles. Philea leaned over and whispered, he once tried to tell me his sprained ankle was the price of spiritual alignment. I fell down the stairs. Theodax admitted sheepishly. They sat in the warmth of the courtyard for a while, just letting the sun soak in, sipping tea that tasted like chamomile and secrets. Later that day, Nicandros helped Philea collect herbs. She handed him a woven basket and pointed toward the lower terraces. We need lavender, whorehound, and honesty. Honesty, he asked, grinning. It's a plant, not a confession booth. The terraces were quiet. Bees drifted between the rows of blossoms, and a light breeze carried the scent of sun-warmed herbs. Nicandros crouched beside a lavender bush, fingers brushing gently over the stems, listening as she called out each plant's name, its use, and sometimes a ridiculous memory attached to it. That one, she said, pointing at a spiky-leafed plant, once made a priest sneeze so violently he fell into the ritual bath. Was he purified or just wet? Both, they gathered, until their baskets were full. then sat beneath a shady olive tree and watched the clouds meander overhead. "Do you think you'll stay?" Philea asked, not looking directly at him. Nicandros took a breath. "I don't know. I came here looking for something. Healing maybe, or just a rest. But now it feels like maybe I was meant to find something else." "Like what?" He held up a sprig of lavender, twirled it slowly between his fingers. "Like purpose, like the part of me I forgot existed." Philea nodded slowly. "I think Asclepios gives more than just physical healing. Sometimes he gives you back to yourself." They walked back in companionable silence, their footsteps soft on the path, the herb scent trailing behind them like invisible ribbons. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, Nicandros sat with the healer from Thessaly and helped her mix poultices. She showed him how to fold the linen just right, how to press without bruising, how to tell by scent whether a tea had steeped long enough. "Teaching suits you," she said, tying off a final bandage. "You've got that calmness people trust." He didn't respond right away, but his chest felt warm. Afterward, he walked alone through the temple, past the great columns carved with serpents, through the statue hall where pilgrims left offerings, tokens, carved wood, tiny silver snakes, herbs tied with ribbon, and occasionally a well-loved sandal left in thanks for feet that no longer limped. He found himself back at the empty now, except for one priest lighting the oil lamps for the evening watch. Nicandros stood in the doorway, listening to the gentle hiss of the flame, the soft scuff of sandals on stone. He laid down once more on his mat, not because he needed healing, but because he wanted to remember, to lie in the place where he changed, where something inside him had been stirred awake like coals under ash that night. He didn't dream of snakes. He dreamed of a small clinic in a quiet village, of hands wrapping bandages, of laughter shared over tea, a wooden bench under a lemon tree, children playing with sticks and pretending to heal each other, and somewhere, beneath it all, a soft voice saying, "You are whole now, go make others whole." He awoke just before dawn. The sky was still bruised with early shadows. The snakes were gone, but he smiled because the dream had stayed. The morning light poured softly into the temple courtyard as Nicandros prepared for his final day as a pilgrim. The scent of fresh bread baking nearby mingled with the lingering fragrance of herbs, the same comforting aroma that had become a quiet companion during his stay. Pilgrims and priests alike moved with gentle purpose, their voices hushed as if to preserve the peace the temple offered. Nicandros found himself drawn toward the central sanctuary where the great altar to Asclepios stood, carved with intricate serpent motifs that shimmered faintly in the morning sun. He noticed a small group gathered children from a nearby village, their eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. A kindly priest was telling them stories about the temple's sacred snakes, their silent wisdom, and the healing they represented. Nicandros listened from the edge, smiling as the children gasped and laughed at the more whimsical parts. Later, he joined Philea and Theodax in the herb garden, where they prepared small bundles of medicinal plants to send with departing pilgrims. Philea carefully wrapped sprigs of thyme, rosemary, and marjoram in linen, while Theodax inscribed gentle blessings on parchment. Nicandros took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him here, the restless nights, the quiet mornings, the moments of laughter and healing. He realized the temple was more than a place to seek cures. It was a sanctuary for the soul, a place where the heart could rest and the mind could find clarity as the sun climbed higher. The temple began to fill with the sounds of farewells and promises to return. Nicandros packed his few belongings with care, the shimmering snake scale tucked safely in his sash. Before leaving, he knelt by the altar, whispering a silent thanks to Asclepios for the healing and peace he had found. The warmth of the morning sun felt like a gentle embrace, a reminder that this journey was only the beginning. With a light heart and steady steps, Nicandros stepped beyond the temple gates, ready to carry the wisdom of the snakes and the spirit of healing into the world beyond. The afternoon sun began to soften, casting long shadows across the temple grounds as Nicandros made his way toward the quiet path that would lead him back to the village. The scent of wildflowers and warm earth filled the air, wrapping around him like a familiar blanket. He paused for a moment to look back at the temple, its marble columns glowing softly in the fading light, the carved serpents seeming almost alive in the gentle dusk. The sanctuary had become more than just stone and legend. It was a place where ancient mysteries whispered in the wind, where healing was not just a practice, but a way of being. Nicandros felt a deep calm settle over him. The restless tension that had followed him like a shadow was finally lifting, replaced by a quiet confidence and a gentle sense of purpose. He realized healing was not a destination, but a journey, one that required patience, kindness, and sometimes the courage to face the unknown. As he walked, the memories of his time at the temple came softly to mind, the gentle laughter of the healer from Thessaly, Theodax's wry jokes, Thalea's quiet wisdom, and the mysterious golden snakes that seemed to guard both body and soul. These moments wove together like the threads of a comforting tapestry, each one adding color and texture to his new understanding. Night began to fall, and the stars appeared, twinkling like tiny guides, lighting his way home. Nicandros breathed in the cool evening air, feeling the rhythm of the world slow down around him. He smiled softly, knowing that the peace he had found here would travel with him, a gentle light to guide him through the darkest nights. And with that comforting thought, he let himself drift slowly and gently into a deep, restful sleep.